Welcome to Biden Brief. UN reports says West Bank settler violence has displaced over 1,100 Palestinians since 2022. The Toronto Star. A report released by the UN on Thursday revealed that violence from Israeli settlers has led to the displacement of over 1,100 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank since 2022. The report documented 3 settler-related incidents each day in the West Bank, the highest daily average since the UN began documenting the trend in 2006. The violence has resulted in the complete emptying out of 5 Palestinian communities, with 6 more losing half their inhabitants and 7 seeing a quarter flee. The rise in settler violence is further undermining the prospects for an independent Palestinian state. Why gun groups support charges against Hunter Biden. The Independent. Gun rights groups in the U.S., such as the Gun Owners of America and the National Rifle Association, have not rushed to defend Hunter Biden after he was indicted on 3 charges related to the purchase of a firearm. The charges are connected to Biden's alleged lie on a federal form required for the sale of the gun and possession of the weapon while under the influence of drugs. Gun groups have celebrated the indictment and suggested that Biden should face the same scrutiny and restrictions they normally oppose for drug users. They have argued that the Gun Control Act of 1968 makes it a crime for any unlawful user to possess or receive any firearm or ammunition, and have pointed to recent court decisions that have questioned the constitutionality of restricting gun access for nonviolent drug users. However, it is unclear whether Biden's case will become a landmark Second Amendment decision or how gun rights activists will react if it does. Democrats think Trump is the opponent they want. They're wrong, again. Telegraph. Joe Biden may be benefiting from promoting Donald Trump as the standard-bearer for the Republican Party. By highlighting Trump's positions on issues like abortion, Biden is able to rally support from his own base and strengthen his own candidacy. This strategy has been successful for Democrats in the past, as they have used negative partisanship to boost vulnerable Republican candidates and ultimately defeat them in general elections. However, the article warns that this is a high-stakes gamble, as Trump's surprise win in 2016 caused near-existential despair among Democrats. Top military leader confirmed by Senate after GOP blockade. The Independent. Senator Tommy Tuberville has ended his blockade of military nominations, allowing the Senate to confirm the appointment of General Charles Q. Brown as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Alabama Republican had been holding up the nominations in protest at military policy on abortion, arguing that it required taxpayers to fund the procedure. The policy, which was introduced by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, permits military personnel to receive travel and transportation allowances and appropriate administrative absence if they need to travel outside the military for an abortion. A third party signed up 15,000 voters in Arizona. Democrats worry that's enough for a Biden spoiler. The Toronto Star. More than 15,000 people in Arizona have registered for a new political party, No Labels, which is considering running a bipartisan unity ticket against Joe Biden and Donald Trump in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. The party has already secured ballot access in Arizona and 10 other states and is aiming to reach all 50 by Election Day. The Arizona Democratic Party has sued the state's Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, in an effort to prevent No Labels from being on the ballot. Although the Democratic Party lost in court and dropped the suit, it is now pressing Fontes to force No Labels to reveal its donors. No Labels has refused, saying it is following federal law and protecting donor privacy. The group has not committed to running candidates for president and vice president, and says it will decide after the Super Tuesday primaries in March. The party is primarily attracting young people, more than half are under 35 and 12% live in the 4th Congressional District, where Arizona State University is situated. Zelensky makes his case at the U.S. Capitol for more war aid as Republican support softens. The Toronto Star. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Washington to meet with Republican and Democratic leaders of the House and Senate. Zelensky's second visit since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 comes as Biden's request to Congress for an additional $24 billion for Ukraine's military and humanitarian needs is under review. Back home, Russia launched its heaviest strikes in a month, killing 3 people. Zelensky is meeting with U.S. military leaders at the Pentagon and will speak with President Joe Biden at the White House. Zelensky visits Washington, says air defense aid top issue. South China Morning Post. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Washington to hold talks with U.S. President Joe Biden on securing more U.S. weapons. Zelensky said that air defense is a priority for Ukraine, as Russia hit cities across Ukraine with a barrage of missiles ahead of the talks. Zelensky also faces the task of wooing Congress, where Ukraine's hopes are hostage to the drama over a looming government shutdown. The White House said the Ukrainian leader's visit comes at a really critical time as Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces continues. Ukraine, Zelensky arrives in Washington for war talks. Deutsche Welle. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Washington, D.C. for meetings with U.S. President Joe Biden and other political leaders. Zelensky is pushing for fresh U.S. assistance and will discuss air defense as a top priority. The visit comes as some conservative Republicans are growing wary of continued U.S. aid to Ukraine, and former President Donald Trump has suggested that the U.S. provides too much support. Zelensky has called on Trump to publicly share his plan to end the war in Ukraine, but it cannot involve giving up territory to Russia. Zelensky confronts an increasingly skeptical Republican Party. Washington Post. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is heading to Capitol Hill today for the first time since December, and he's facing Republican lawmakers who have grown increasingly skeptical of authorizing more aid to Ukraine as the war rages on. The White House is seeking $24 billion in additional aid for Ukraine, a request that's gotten caught up in the larger standoff over funding the government. Some Republicans who oppose sending Ukraine more aid say there's nothing Zelensky can say today that would sway them. FTC Consumer Protection Chief puts data brokers on notice. Washington Post. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, Consumer Protection Chief, Sam Levine, will use a speech at a data summit to criticize data brokers for prioritizing the extraction of as much consumer data as possible, with little regard for privacy. Levine will argue that data brokers' actions threaten constitutional rights and can be used against individuals. The speech indicates that the agency is stepping up scrutiny of the data broker industry, and may undertake more stringent enforcement against privacy infringements. Levine will call on companies to more carefully vet data brokers and implement more robust privacy practices. The FTC launched a lawsuit against data broker Kokeva last year, which it failed to win in May. However, the agency is unlikely to be deterred from pursuing future lawsuits, despite this setback. Killing in Canada is not the diplomatic bombshell many think it is. SCMP opinion. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met on the sidelines of the Group of 20, G20, summit in New Delhi, rather than for formal bilateral talks, due to a diplomatic spat between the two countries. The disagreement began when the Modi government scolded Ottawa for allowing Sikh activists in Canada to advocate for independence for the northwestern state of Punjab. Trudeau later claimed there was strong evidence implicating the Indian government in the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The incident is likely to hinder Canada's efforts to expand trade and business with India. The dumbest, wildest budget fight yet. Economist. The ongoing budget battles in the U.S. have created chaos and uncertainty. The deficit has doubled in a year to $2 trillion and the gross federal debt is above 120% of GDP and climbing. The U.S. is also facing a Social Security crisis, with the fund that tops up Social Security benefits due to be depleted in 10 years, which will mean mandated benefit cuts of 23 to 25%. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans want to reduce money for defense or veterans, so discretionary programs, such as education and transport, which account for about a quarter of spending, are likely to face huge cuts. The Committee for a Responsible Budget estimates that, to reach balance, spending on all other programs would have to be cut by 85% from current levels over 10 years. The article suggests that lawmakers should demand passage of a bipartisan Senate bill that, in a shutdown, would force members to stay in session 7 days a week until they pass a budget. America's dumbest, wildest budget fight yet. Economist. The U.S. government is once again teetering on the brink of a shutdown as politicians fail to agree on a budget, and the budget community in Washington is calling for a long-term plan to address the country's fiscal crisis. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has estimated that discretionary programs, such as education and transport, would need to be cut by 85% over the next decade in order to balance the budget. However, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are willing to cut spending on defense or veterans, meaning that cuts would have to be made to other programs. The budget community wants responsible representatives to use their votes to demand a commission to map out ways to achieve fiscal stability, as well as the passage of a bipartisan Senate bill that would force members to stay in session 7 days a week until a budget is passed. The U.S. deficit has doubled in the past year to $2 trillion, reaching 7.4% of GDP, the highest level in any fiscal year not marked by a war or recession. Russia bombards power facilities across Ukraine ahead of Zelensky's meeting with Biden. CNN. Ukraine experienced a series of deadly missile attacks by Russia, targeting energy facilities in Kiev and other cities, just hours before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was scheduled to meet U.S. President Joe Biden. 2 people died in Kherson, and 7 were injured in Kiev, including a 9-year-old girl. The attacks caused damage to power facilities and resulted in blackouts in several areas. Ukrainian air defenses shot down 36 of the 43 missiles launched by Russia. The attacks occurred as Kiev reached the 1,000-hour mark of air raid alarms since the start of the Russian invasion. Don't be surprised if Xi is a no-show at U.S. APEC summit. South China Morning Post. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent speech on American foreign policy, titled The Power and Purpose of American Diplomacy in a New Era, has been described as idealistic and self-righteous. Blinken declared the end of the post-Cold War period and highlighted Russia and China as the most immediate threats to the international order. His speech also warned against dangers posed by elected leaders who exploit resentments and stoke fears. The article suggests that Blinken's speech is consistent with President Joe Biden's views and does not bode well for improved Sino-U.S. relations. U.S. offers almost 500,000 Venezuelans legal status. BBC. The Biden administration has announced that Venezuelans seeking asylum in the U.S. will be allowed to work legally under new rules. Around 472,000 individuals will be eligible for Temporary Protected Status, TPS, for a period of 18 months. The move comes in response to calls by Democrats to expand work access for newly arrived migrants. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security stated that the expansion of protected status for Venezuelans was warranted due to the country's increased instability and lack of safety. The number of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally has rebounded in recent months, prompting Republican-led states to transport migrants to Democratic-run areas in protest at border policies. Crown Prince confirms Riyadh will seek nuclear arsenal if Iran develops one. The Guardian. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said that if Iran develops a nuclear bomb, Saudi Arabia will do the same. The announcement comes as the U.S. is seeking a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal, which Prince Mohammed said was getting closer every day. However, there are several obstacles to a deal coming to fruition. These include resistance from Israel's hard-right cabinet, difficulties in getting formalized security guarantees through Congress, and Saudi Arabia's poor human rights record. A key issue is nuclear cooperation. Section 123 of the Atomic Energy Act requires any U.S. cooperation in helping a foreign state build up a civilian nuclear program to ensure that no nuclear technology or material under the agreement is used to make weapons. Any relaxation of these conditions for Saudi Arabia would trigger outrage in Congress, where opposition to Riyadh is widespread. Commentators have speculated that if the U.S. does not offer Saudi Arabia a nuclear cooperation deal, then it could seek one with China. U.S. Environment Agency calls for bids for $4.6 billion in grants to cut emissions. Reuters. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, is seeking bids from state, local, and tribal governments for $4.6 billion in grants to implement climate action plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The competitive grants are funded under President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and aim to support the administration's goal of reducing climate pollution by 50 to 52% by 2030. The funding will also help communities that are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The grants will be awarded in 2 tranches, with one competition for general grants and another specifically for tribes and territories. An EPA report last week showed that the U.S. economy is projected to emit significantly less carbon dioxide by 2030 as a result of the IRA. Trump's abortion comments spur backlash from the right. Washington Post. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been criticized by some anti-abortion supporters over comments he made on NBC's Meet the Press. Trump called a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy a terrible thing and a terrible mistake and pledged to work with both sides on the issue, despite abortion rights groups staunchly opposing such restrictions. Anti-abortion leaders have called on Trump to clarify his position, following criticism from Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his main rival in the Republican presidential primary. Trump has previously supported abortion rights and his position has shifted over the years. U.S. has costly delusions about decoupling from China. Bloomberg. President Joe Biden's efforts to reorganize the global economy and reduce reliance on China come with significant risks and challenges, according to an op-ed in Bloomberg. The article argues that the administration's goal of sparking a renaissance in manufacturing jobs has already failed, as productivity growth, not trade, is driving the decline. Protectionist policies may create some new jobs, but they also come with costs, such as job losses in downstream companies that have to pay more for imported inputs. Additionally, the article highlights the conflict between the administration's objectives, such as the incentives for electric vehicles, which exclude the world's largest producers of nickel and cobalt. The broader goal of disentangling from China will be even more difficult and dangerous, as other countries are increasingly reliant on the Chinese economy. The article warns that reorganizing globalization will be less costly for the US than for other countries along the value chains, and developing countries could suffer significant economic hits. The author suggests that the Biden administration should reconsider its strategy and be cautious about poking China, especially if it is not going to achieve its manufacturing job goals. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.